This is the Business Maker Show, heard on the radio and seen online at thebusinessmakers.com. It's guest time on the show, and this is a very special featured guest session for two reasons. Number one, I'm in front of a live audience. Very live audience, the Muslim Professional Association. And my guest today is a repeat guest, Dr. Don Minnick. Don, welcome back to the Business Maker Show.
Thank you, Russ. My pleasure.
Now, Don, what has always been so interesting to me is your background prior to YSC as a consultant, an independent consultant. And that's where you sort of develop this expertise, which you ultimately can advise people on how to make themselves indispensable in their company. So describe your background in that regard.
Well, actually, I'm a clinical psychologist by training, but I've been doing organization consulting work for many, many years. This particular set of concepts occurred about, 5 or 6 years ago, when a colleague of mine and I began to look at the whole concept of downsizing. At that point, downsizing was becoming an organizational strategy to make organizations leaner and more responsive. And what that meant, obviously, in practical terms, is people were losing their jobs. So the folks that we worked with, obviously, were very concerned about that, and we thought it was important to begin to gather some information about that process. More specifically about what did organizations look at when they made the decision to keep this person and let this person go. So we began to collect some survey data about that. And we asked basically the same question in a couple of different ways. We asked, please describe for us the capabilities, the skills, the personality aspects that you look for that would make somebody very valuable in your organization. So we began to gather that kind of data. Initially, as I said, focused around, the questions that our clients had at that point, and that was, how can I keep my job? What do I have to do to be able to keep my job in this kind of environment? Right away, we began to see, though, that the answers to those questions kind of went beyond keeping a job and really connected to leadership, and leadership at every level in the organization. As all of you know, you don't have to be at the top of the organization in order to demonstrate leadership. And so these skills seem to begin to sort themselves around what really are emerging leadership qualities. So that's where we ended up.
Okay, so now I know from the first time that we had this discussion, as you were describing it, I personally had been in a company leadership position several times where we were downsizing, and believe me, it's painful, but it was so interesting to me as you talked about asking these other business leaders what were the characteristics that made people indispensable. What it led to were things that I think I was doing and other leaders were doing without putting words to it. So let's carry it to the next step, and let's put some words to what your survey resulted in.
Well, a couple of things were surprising right up front. One thing was, as we gathered this information, began to sort it and organize it, it was quite surprising that almost no one referenced technical ability. So the point of that is to say that technical ability is kind of a given. If you don't have the technical ability to do the job, you shouldn't be there anyway. So these capabilities went way beyond technical ability. That was a given. So what we began to see right away were two, what we're calling kind of core competencies right up front. One was something that we collapsed into the term personal initiative, and the other we collapsed into the term capacity for collaboration. Those two things seem to be at the core of what organizations looked for to determine who was going to be the most valuable employees in their organization.
I found those two to be very indicative of the way that I actually always thought. The only thing I'd sort of add to it is that when I was always in the position of choosing the team that goes forward and leave those behind that don't, there's always seemed to me to be a group of employees on the team that knew exactly what the mission was, that knew exactly what I as the CEO had to accomplish, and they were able to tune into that. In my opinion, when Don talks about personal initiative and even the collaboration aspect, both of those lined up perfectly with how I always viewed it. But from there, you dug in deeper.
Yeah, let me say just a couple more things about personal initiative and capacity for collaboration to just sort of flesh out what those mean. And I will alert you to this fact, that although organizations really like individuals who show personal initiative, they really like individuals who show the ability to collaborate with others, the person they like the best is the person that has those two capabilities in balance. In other words, someone who can do both. So it's not good enough just to be someone who takes personal initiative, and by the way, that means seeing what needs to be done in the organization, as Russ is suggesting, setting about to do that without being directed to, acting in some ways as a detective in your organization to see what needs to be done and taking that proactive step to take care of those problems. That's kind of what personal initiative is all about in a nutshell. Capacity for collaboration really means a kind of an orientation to other people. A capability to be able to see how other people can interact with you as you do your work, a responsiveness to the people around you, a kind of a tuning in. You may have heard the term emotional intelligence. It's kind of that aspect. That's what capacity for collaboration is, being able to see what your impact is with others and align that in a way that people can collaborate effectively with each other. And as organizations get, in our terminology, flatter and flatter, less hierarchically structured, that requirement to collaborate across the organization becomes very, very important. And the people who do that well are people that are valuable in the organization.
Okay. Now, I also know that, a personal initiative that you sort of got deeper into the definition underneath that. Share that with us.
We found two things really that kind of aligned with personal initiative. One is something that, for lack of a better term, I'll call mental agility. And mental agility, as you might imagine, sort of implies that quickness in thought and action, that ability to apprehend things and tune in quite quickly, to sort of see the bigger picture and how things sort themselves, being able to be flexible in the way that you think about things. And another really interesting thing about mental agility is having a really well-calibrated intuitive ability. The ability to take action and to see how your work needs to go forward, even in the absence of all the data. The old dictum is anybody can make a good decision if they've got 100% of the data and all the time in the world. But most of the time we don't have that. So that well-calibrated intuitive ability is very, very helpful. So those are the aspects of kind of mental agility in the way that we're thinking about it. And by the way, I should back up here to say too, Russ, that these things that I'm laying out for you are not academic theories. They didn't come out of a textbook somewhere. These came from people who are in a position to know the answers to these questions. These came from managers and other people in organizations who are making judgments about who is indispensable and who is not in the organization. So these things are kind of tested in the marketplace, if you will, in that way. So mental agility is one aspect of personal initiative. And the other is something that we call action learning. And action learning is just as that might apply. It's ability to kind of draw learning from every action that you take, from your mistakes and from your successes. Is what have you learned in those situations? And folks who are mentally agile are tuned in to that sort of action learning component. That's kind of a side element, if you will, both under personal initiative and both very, very important.
I couldn't help but think when you were talking about mental agility and you talked about, anybody can make a good decision with plenty of time and all the data. that's what always amazed me about the real business world, is that how many times you had to make decisions and you might only have 30% of the information and 20% to make it. But good people realize, well, those are the odds I'm dealing with, so I'll go ahead and make it.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other comment while Don's talking that I thought of, that the first time that we talked about this, it was totally based upon the down market that we were living in '08 and '09, and it was all about layoffs. But it was so obvious to me that all these characteristics are keys to success that I immediately shared them with my 20-year-old daughter at the time, who since then has graduated from college, and said, you have to think this way. Thinking this way is the business way of the future, and if you can grasp this and what they mean and exercise and execute, it really will help you in your career. Okay, but we haven't completely drawn the picture yet, because we just sort of filled out the personal initiative side. So move back over now to the capacity for collaboration. There's detail under that as well.
Yeah, we found two skill sets that fall under the capacity for collaboration piece. One we're calling visible competence. And what this is all about is this. Consider the fact that you can be the smartest person, the most capable person, the most technically skilled person in your organization, and if nobody knows it, it doesn't do you any good. And it doesn't do the organization any good either. So we've kind of gotten away from, as organizations have gotten, again, leaner and more responsive, we've gotten away from the exclusive notion that good work speaks for itself. Good work speaks for itself only if you give it a voice. And that's kind of what competence, visible competence, is all about. It's making sure that people in your organization know what it is that you can do, and they know you. Laboring in obscurity doesn't work very well in organizations anymore. So that visible competence piece is doing the things that you can do to make yourself visible in that organization. And that may mean talking about your work, giving presentations, as you saw here tonight, a wonderful way to gain visibility in an organization, and being proactive, if you will, and sort of taking that step to do that and create that, get that kind of visibility for yourself. So visible competence is one aspect of that capacity for collaboration. And the other aspect is something that we refer to as boundary spanning. And boundary spanning is this. If you think about the traditional organization that was very vertically structured, functionally structured in what is referred to sometimes as silos in an organization, the downside of, now, silos are good. There's not anything wrong with functional silos, because that leads to specialization, it leads to clear communication, it leads to all of those kinds of things. Where functional boundaries become toxic to an organization is when there's no communication across those boundaries. So if you think about, and you'll hear organizations talking about this these days, talking about one team, meaning that we act as an organization as one team. We all have the same big picture view. We all understand clearly how our work fits into that big picture, and we collaborate with each other across those functional boundaries so that our work gets done more effectively. It's sort of interesting. We're doing some work in our organization now, and particularly in emerging markets, with emerging leaders. And one of the things that we're helping them to do is that kind of network analysis, to see who it is in this organization, even if it's a great big organization, who is it that I need to be connected to? Who are the key influencers in this organization? Who are the kind of go-to people? And as all of you know, that doesn't necessarily correspond to an organization chart, but who are those key people, and how do I begin to build connections with them, particularly across my functional boundaries? As you can do that, that really lubricates the effectiveness of the work that you're able to do in the organization. So that boundary spanning, very, very important as well.
Okay. Personal initiative over here, capacity for collaboration over here, mental agility, action learning over here, visible competence, and boundary spanning over here. Don, I really appreciate you sharing that with us once again.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank all of you for allowing us to come and talk to you today.
Let's hear it for Dr. Don Minnick. Great. And this is the Business Maker Show, heard on the radio and seen online at thebusinessmakers.com.